Welcome back everyone, welcome kitchen table wizards and deck brewers from all over the world. If you are looking for janky decks, if you are looking for 3 card combos, 4 card combos, 5 card combos, you have come to the right place. If you are looking for the best deck that will crush your opponents at the Pro Tour, you can go now because this is not the place for that. Bye. So here at Casual MTG Decks, we really focus on the fun 60 card deck. I focus on out of the ordinary tribal decks. I like to brew around like old school concepts or maybe really famous decks from back in the day, but then with a new flavor and mostly also a bit more budget friendly. And I also like to brew around alternative win conditions. And this last one is the thing I'm going to focus on today. Because today we are the millers. So from the first day of Magic, Magic's creator Richard Garfield, he already envisioned the alternative win condition. Apart from dying from lethal damage, a player could also lose the game by not being able to draw a card because he or she wouldn't have any cards left in his library. And back in the day, there was one card that speeded up this process. And this card was called Millstone. And that's why this is now called a mill deck. Now, today's deck is going to focus exclusively on this win condition. So that means we play 0 creatures, but we do play a ton of removal, a lot of counter spells and a lot of mill cards, which will definitely frustrate your opponent. As always, a special thanks goes out to our partner Cardmarket. Feel free to leave a comment below and you'll be able to win a voucher. And of course, the biggest thanks goes out to you, all the viewers. Leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and also very importantly, let me know which deck you would like to see. And I will be happy to have a look and try to brew around this theme for you. This deck is only costing around $25, 20 euros. And if you don't like to hear me rambling about it, you can also look at the link below where we have the full deck list in the description. But now let's head into the deck. As always, we start with the land base, and you know it is important to focus on the flavor of the deck and to find matching lands. This time I went back a whole lot and I found these beautiful, and they're also a little bit rare, lands from an artist called Shippy. So first of all, this beautiful swamp with the moon is very rare. It's from 2008 and it also has a matching island. I do think the island was reprinted already once, but also very cool, and I really think it fits well with the mysterious mill theme. I play 8 swamps and 8 islands. Then I do play a little bit of dual lands, 2 dismal backwaters to give me some extra life, and I also play 2 sunken hollow. Of course, you can also play 4 dismal backwater. That will make the deck even more cheap. I also decided to play 2 Mystic Sanctuary. It's a great card to get some instants or sorceries back from your graveyard on top of your library. Blighted Fan helps me to get rid of some pesky creatures, as I can sacrifice the land and have target opponent also sacrifice a creature. And I do also play 1 mill land called Nephalia's Drownyard. Then I play some mana ramp in the form of 2 Dimir Signets. A mill deck needs to include a Johnny Miller, so a Planswalker, and this time I play Ashiok the Dream Render. It's the mill Planswalker out there if you ask me, and for a -1 you get target player puts the top 4 cards of their library into their graveyard and then exile each opponent's graveyard. So a very good card not only for mill but also for graveyard removal. I'm not playing a millstone, but I play a Codex Shredder. It's a great play to play on turn 1. You can use it to mill your opponent, and later in the game you can sacrifice it to get an important card back from your graveyard to your hand. Of course, if we are a mill deck, we need the millers to be in here, and the following 6 cards are only exclusively for milling your opponent. I play 3 Compelling Arguments, 2 Mind Sculpts and 1 Stream of Thought, because the art is super cool from Seth MacKinnon, but also later in the game you can use it to mill 12, which can sometimes help you win the game on the next turn. Then there's also a fake mill card called Talent of the Telepath. It has your opponent reveal the top 7 cards or his or her library, and then you may cast an instant or sorcery without paying its mana cost. Now it also has Spell Mastery, and that means when you have 2 or more instants or sorceries in your graveyard, you may cast up to 2 instant or sorceries. The fun thing about this card that all those 7 cards are then put in the graveyard of your opponent. So it mills for 7 and also have you play some instants or sorceries for free. In terms of the enchantments, I also play the Sphinx's Tutelage and also a Patient Rebuilding. And this last card is pretty cool because it also draws you cards. For each land that is put into the graveyard at the beginning of your upkeep, when your opponent has to put the top 3 cards of their library into their graveyard. Some more draw millers are Pilfered Plans and Into the Story. And the last one is a relatively new card from Throne to Eldraine, and it will only cost you 4 mana as an instant to draw 4 cards. So a great card in this mill deck. Then I also play some permission, or permission as they say, some counter magic with 3 Psychic Strikes, a counter spell that also mills, and 2 Drown in the Logs. This card can counter spells, but it could also destroy creatures with converted mana cost less or equal than the number of cards in its controller's graveyard. And mostly because we're milling him, he will have a lot of cards in his graveyard. Then some removal or removal. What a great joke, Bram, you're doing awesome. I play 3 Death's Approach and 3 Grisly Spectacle. Both cards are super synergistic with the mill team, and the Grisly Spectacle can sometimes be really a blowout, because when you use it to kill a big creature, it will force your opponent to put an equal amount of cards from his library into his graveyard, equal to the power of the creature you destroyed. So if he has a big creature, it's even better for you. I also included some spot removal. Tribute to Hunger is a great card because an opponent has to sacrifice a creature, but it also gains you some life. And I also play 1 Cast Down, a great card for 2 mana that kills about 90% or 95% of all creatures. Then let's have a look at some mass removal. I play 1 Witch's Vengeance against tribal decks. And you know I build a lot and I also play against a lot, so a good card. I also play 1 Yahenni's Expertise. In this deck it's mostly a removal and a mill spell or a draw spell. And then I also play 1 Languish, giving all creatures -4/-4, an awesome removal spell for 4 mana. To end the deck, I also include some bounce and tug spells. Iterize and Iter Spots are really annoying for your opponent if he wants to attack with all his creatures. And I also play 1 Blink of an Eye, a bounce effect that could also draw me an additional card for 2 more mana. So this was the deck list, a lot of milled spells to look forward to. Now let's head into the power rankings. I gave the deck a power of 6. Of course, we don't play powerful creatures that do a lot of damage, but nonetheless the deck is quite good and really efficient against creature decks and even against control decks. Complexity, I gave it a 7 together with consistency. You really have to understand a little bit the style that your opponent is playing to get maximum value out of this deck. So complexity, I still gave it a 7. Offense, I gave it a 0 because it has no creatures and it will win by milling out your opponent, emptying his library. So offense 0. Defense, I gave it an 8. It could also be a 9 because 50% of the cards in the deck are defensive cards. Fun factor, I gave it a 7. For your opponent it will probably be a 2 because he will not be having fun when you are destroying all his creatures and countering all his spells. And value for money, I gave it an 8 because it's a really cheap deck to buy and it could be fun. For you, that is. Not for your opponent. Now let's quickly head into the metagame review. The deck has the most trouble against aggressive decks. That's why I gave it a 5 against aggro. It does a bit better against mid-range decks. Against control decks it does pretty well. And also against combo decks I gave it a 7 because it has some counter spells. Of course, if we look at the complete card list of Magic, we find a lot of mill cards. So the following cards are maybe some ideas if you want to play around with the deck and change some cards to make it more diverse, or maybe you like a few cards better than the ones that are in the deck. We need to start with the original Millstone. For 2 mana you get an artifact that when you tap it and pay 2 mana, target player puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard. So this was the first card that emphasizes on the mill theme. Now the Millstone isn't the best mill card out there and that's why I didn't include it in the deck. But there are a few good enchantments, like for example Sphinx's Tutelage, but also Fraying Sanity. This is a really strong enchantment for the mill team. In Core 19 you also had Psychic Corrosion, which in this deck could also be an efficient milling tool. One of you viewers talked about his Traumatized deck, which he was playing back in the day. So Traumatize is a really big mill card and Glimpse of the Unthinkable is also a similarly strong mill card for even a little bit less mana, but the card is a bit more expensive when you want to buy it on cardmarket. So this is why I left those two out. Another cool mill card is Startled Awake. For 4 mana, target opponent puts the top 13 cards in his or her library. For 4 mana, target opponent puts the top 13 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. And then for 5 mana, you can turn this card into the battlefield transformed and then you get a 1/1 nightmare creature.
But Bram, you do play a creature in your deck actually?
Yes, Camille, this sorcery could change into a creature, but it's still a sorcery. So technically, it's not a creature, okay?
Okay.
And the last card I want to discuss is Visions from Beyond with a beautiful art of Therese Nielsen. This is actually an Ancestral's Recall for this deck because a lot of times a graveyard has 20 or more cards in it and then for just 1 mana you will draw 3 cards as an instant. So this was our creatureless mill deck. Let me know in the comments how you like your mill deck and as always, keep it casual. Bye.